Today we're going to be talking to David Richardson, the CEO and co-founder of bioSyntagma. How are you, David?
Great. How are you?
Pretty good. It's a Friday afternoon, so it's nice to be able to take some time and have a conversation.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So I would love to just kind of go into it and just straight up, what does your company do? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about what we do without talking about the why. But what we do is we develop technology for mapping tumors, and there's reasons why we do it. But essentially, it's to help drug developers and to make better diagnostics.
Yeah, I mean, it's always dangerous when there are misdiagnostics, and when you're dealing with something that's so sensitive to someone, hearing something detrimental to, news and then have it not be true, it's a horrible feeling.
You'd be surprised that precision medicine, it's come so far, but some of the really advanced treatments that work really well, the diagnostics that are used to select who gets them are sometimes less than a coin toss accurate. And so there's a lot of room for improvement on how you recommend which patients get what treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it really seems it can be preference of the doctor. It can be their experience, what they've seen, conversations with colleagues. There's a lot of different variables that can come into it. And this definitely isn't a field that you just would kind of stumble into. I would love to know your journey as to how you are where you are and what led you to start this company.
It's kind of funny, is I did kind of stumble into this, actually.
Really?
You've seen the show Silicon Valley, but when that show came out, it was actually really therapeutic for me because I'd say the first 2 seasons, I felt like each episode was, I was like in a therapy session watching someone else talk about my life. So I felt like someone understood. But yeah, I did kind of stumble into this. I started out actually doing software, working for a company that would contract for the DoD and doing government security projects. And then did a complete 180 when I went to school and got involved in orthopedic implants, doing knee, hip, and spine implants. And then I had kind of an experience with cancer in my family. And when I went back to grad school, got involved in cancer research and stuck around in that field, really until I was working with some really brilliant researchers at the Biodesign Institute at ASU. When a few of us had an idea and realized, wow, that could help patients. And I think at the time, it wasn't so much of me evaluating, should I be an entrepreneur? It was more of this is the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to help people. And the only way this can help people is through the vehicle of a business. And so it was more like I have to do this, and not so much I want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I love that you recognized a need, and not necessarily a gap, but a true need within, how care could be provided and how people could ultimately, have a better output and better survival rate. I mean, it's a true selfless thing that you chose to do.
Well, I had an interesting experience with my aunt. So my aunt passed away from cancer, and she had lung cancer. And it was the first time that I was ever exposed to this concept of acquired drug resistance. I'm sure you've heard of drug resistance for antibiotics. That's why they always tell you, hey, finish your antibiotics. But I didn't know that cancer patients can develop resistance to their treatments as well, in basically the same way. So that was really new for me. And ultimately, when she passed, she had become resistant to almost every commercially available chemotherapy. And so there wasn't really many options left. And so when we started out, it was the premise of how can we keep that from happening? How do you stop this issue of acquired drug resistance? And so it was a kind of a fascinating and really challenging problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the first things you hear is if you start a 10-day antibiotic, even if you feel good, don't stop taking it, because, that's how your body builds up a resistance. And I mean, it makes sense with antibiotics. And now that you've put it in terms of cancer resistance, I can absolutely see how that is something that's a legitimate problem.
Yeah. I have a little anecdote that I think explains it well for cancer. A few years ago, well, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I had bought an abandoned home, and was going to fix it up. And I had like giant weeds in the backyard because it had been abandoned. And every day on my way to work, I said, I'm going to pick the easiest weeds. So I would pick like 5 or 10 weeds on my way out the door every morning to work. And I'd pick the ones that didn't have big thorns and the ones that were easy to pull out of the ground. And what happened was, after a couple of weeks of that, the only weeds left were the ones with massive thorns and the ones with really deep roots. And I had selected for the worst kind of weed. And then when they spread, my yard now had worse weeds and harder to pull weeds. And that's essentially what happens in a tumor. When you give it a drug and the drug maybe reacts on only certain cells that are maybe the weakest, or some respond to the drug, and you're leaving the really bad, strong ones behind. Even if you get rid of almost all the tumor and there's a little left, basically what happened to my yard, I had to pay some professionals to come in and pull my weeds for me because I couldn't do it anymore because they needed equipment. And that's basically what happens with tumors. And so predicting how to treat a patient the right way from the beginning, you can kind of avoid the silly mistake I made of treating it in a way that just makes it worse.
And I mean, this concept, when you explain it that way, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, and that had to have been how you guys felt when you were having that conversation about starting the business. Would you say that the general peers and general, people that you've bounced this idea off of were receptive to it, or was there hesitation when you presented it?
The end result, everybody's like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But how you get there, I think, is more of the technological stretch. So we started with some ideas in 2015 and didn't really start the company until 2016. And back then, what we were talking about with the technology that would be necessary to solve this problem, it didn't exist, and the market for it didn't even exist. So as an entrepreneur, a lot of my struggle was, one, we had to create new technology, but two, I had to convince people that there would be a market that didn't exist yet, and that was really challenging. And in the last 2 years, that market exists now. There's competitors in it. It has a real name. It's called spatial biology, and I don't have to convince people it's real anymore, so it makes my life a lot easier.
That's good. And I mean, you started kind of before it became a thing. Is it, I mean, not that it didn't exist, but, more widely recognized. Was it easier for you to kind of adapt and be able to kind of grow the business versus, you were essentially first to market?
So yeah, we took some unorthodox steps. We built a prototype, and then we tried to commercialize it immediately before raising money by doing pilot projects. And we got projects with big pharma companies and with hospitals. And then based on that, we learned that we had to make some changes to the technology. But it was definitely a challenge, both because of just the life science is just very different than some other industries, especially in Arizona. We're really strong in semiconductor, software, real estate. And so doing something with like deep tech here, most of our collaborators and customers are out of state. And so we had to be pretty creative in how we went to market and who we partnered with.
I mean, creative and be able to make those conversations count, especially when you're dealing with people who are in a different state, different time zone. I mean, conflicting priorities, being able to concisely explain such a complex concept. No wonder you developed that, the weed story. It makes so much sense.
It's, COVID has been awful, but it actually, since most of our collaborators and customers are outside of Arizona, everyone being online has actually made it easier to do business here in Arizona because it's how we communicate with them anyway. And now people are just more accessible. So it's actually been easier to get in touch with people kind of in this post-COVID online world.
Yeah, everyone's like, let's hop on a Zoom call. Let's hop on a Hangout. Let's talk about it.
They're all by their computers. It's great.
Isn't coordinating drives or flights or having to have those face-to-face conversations. It's something that can happen in 10 minutes if you schedule it.
Yeah.
And with your team and the way that you guys are developing it, what is your team's structure today?
So we have, we've been really lean since the beginning. So we have some core co-founders, and then we have employees. But we have been really intentional about using contractors and consultants for different parts of our development. So third-party engineering groups, if we're doing a project with a corporate partner, we'll bring in or subcontract out, what we don't have in-house. And it keeps us from having to spend a lot of money on different equipment and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so the team has stayed pretty small because we've been efficient, kind of outsourcing certain aspects of it. So there are basically 3 of us now. We actually started out with a 4th co-founder who really helped us get off the ground. A guy who's had a long career in vitro diagnostics on the East Coast. He's the guy that basically taught us how to do business development, took a bunch of scientists and taught them how to do business, and then got us going with some early pharma projects. And so we're a small day-to-day team working with a lot of third parties.
And with working with third parties, I mean, you really are in a technology field. Is there concerns about, intellectual property, and kind of what precautions are you taking to make sure that what stays yours is yours?
Yeah, in the beginning, it's funny, as like engineers and scientists, everybody's, including myself, always really worried about, someone's going to take our idea. And I think after a while, you kind of realize if someone can just take your idea, it's probably not a very good idea. So we kind of loosened up a little bit, but we're very, we're protective of our intellectual property, and we have several royalty agreements, so we have to be protective of people that we license to. But yeah, I think that something I've learned through this journey so far is even if you have an NDA, you really shouldn't tell them everything anyway.
That's like a good little rhyme. Even if you have an NDA, don't tell them anything anywhere. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, step of caution, and it's true. I mean, the way that you've described it to me, it does seem simple, but there is so much that goes into it. So to be able to replicate something like that would take a very long time. And by the time it did happen, you guys would already be a few steps ahead.
The goal is to stay ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, on the topic of, ahead and moving forward, what does your future, what's the roadmap look like?
We our technology is functional today. I think so. Our issue is that we're just working on making it faster. So we can work with groups today. We sell services. So for example, we were working with a pharma group, and they had a clinical trial. And for a startup, getting a contract for a clinical trial was like, wow, break out the champagne. But they had a really quick timeline that they needed data turned around in. And as a fairly young company, with only one instrument, we weren't able to do it. So we've taken a step back, focused on making the instrument faster so that we can do these kind of large projects. And so right now what we're doing is we're preparing to launch an early access program with a faster instrument so that we can kind of re-engage in those clinical trial studies, things like that, so we can get out to market and start making, it's really the path to helping patients starts in research. So you start kind of on the discovery R&D side, you work with drug developers, then you get kind of embedded in their clinical trials, and then you can translate out into the market as a new diagnostic. And so that's really the journey. We're jumping back out into providing services to those drug developers.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it is in the startup world. I mean, typically people are like, oh, by year 5. But when you're talking about, medicine, clinical trials, things like that, that's just like the early research phase. It could be 10, 15, 20 years for anything that's technology for, medicine.
It could. I think the fun part about diagnostics is that, it might take that long to make a new drug, but to make a better diagnostic, it really doesn't take that long. All it really takes is, it takes people, it takes some commitment, and it also takes money, but you can do it. It's not really that hard to make a diagnostic and get it to market. Now, making one that's really accurate, there's new technology, of course, but we're really not that far away from launching a first diagnostic.
That's exciting. And when you're going to launch that first diagnostic, I mean, what would the future look like for your company? Like, what is the dream?
I dream less about what our company looks like, and I dream more about what the market looks like. There's so many diagnostics on the market today, and doctors are choosing between them. And the way I see it, there really should only be one. There should be one test that really tests for everything that's on the market today. So if a person has lung cancer, like my aunt, they shouldn't need a bunch of different tests and a bunch of different biopsies. They shouldn't be getting poked, 10 times. There should be one test that tests for it all and predicts whether or not they're going to respond to a treatment, whether they'll develop drug resistance, and advise the doctor accordingly. And that's a future I want to live in.
Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. I mean, my mom has a history of medical problems, thyroid cancer, lymph node issues, and she's always, being tested in different things. And they'll come back and say, "Oh, well, we need to run more tests. We have to do this. We have to do that." And she's like, "Why couldn't you took my blood? Why couldn't those things have been together? What, was this a new diagnostic? Like, was this a new thing that just popped up?" They're like, "Oh no, this was already on our radar." And it's just this ongoing of, is it just a cold, or is something happening that's severe, especially people who are so sensitive to the nature of cancer, because it's a scary thing.
Yeah, it can be, but I have a lot of people reach out to me when they find out they have cancer, and I think being on the research side, it's easy to get pessimistic, like, wow, we haven't beat it yet. But on the other side of that, there's literally no better time to have cancer than today. If you had to have cancer, today's the best day. I've had family members, their stories from 20 years ago are pretty bad. And you look at that, wow, if they had been treated today, a lot of that stuff has been avoided. And so it's exciting for tomorrow. It's sorry to hear stories like you just mentioned. I think there's a lot of opportunity and education for doctors about what's present today and access for patients to get into clinical trials. But it really is the best time, and tomorrow will be better.
Yeah, I mean, you truly seem like this amazingly optimistic person, and I love it. I love everything about it. The ambition, the optimism, the mission of wanting to make things better, and building upon what already exists and just making it better is such an amazing mindset to have.
To me, I feel like it's the only way to survive in this market. Otherwise, it's morbid.
Yeah.
All you do is talk about cancer. If it's not really more of a passion, it's probably not for you.
And I mean, I usually ask this question, and I feel really bad about asking it to you, because you are such an optimistic person. But was there ever a time when you were like, "This isn't going to work. We're not going to make it. This is not going to happen"? Like, I hate to ask it, because you.
No, it's a good question. We've been sued. We have sued others. Our company used to be called something different, but someone, didn't like our names. We had to change it. COVID was really interesting. So during COVID, we had to completely change what we were doing temporarily, and we ended up just developing COVID tests and starting up labs across the country and helping people test. But I think there's that constant, you have to decide that you're going to make it, because there's a million reasons as to why you won't. Even when, just situationally, when we first started the company, and I'm sure my co-founders will hate it when I say this, because they don't want to ever hear that name again. But when we first started our company, we had an instrument, and we were going to sell a service. And I went out to go pitch to investors. And they're like, "I've heard that story before. Who else has an instrument and is selling services? Theranos." And at that time, the news about Theranos had just broke, about the fraud and everything. And our building was literally next door to their building.
Oh no.
And it was like couldn't have been worse for, us trying to get out of that shadow. there's a million reasons why it could not work. You have to basically just decide that it will and do it, make some crazy decisions, take risk, right? It's risk reward.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm having this visual of these like very scientific minded people sitting together saying, now we have to come up with a new name, guys. Like, what are we going to do here? And spitballing these names. And, it seems of all the things that you have to be working on, having to go back and figure that out a second time had to have been like, what, come on. Like,
I know. And the name one was funny too, because we had a group who had a similar name, and they demanded we change our name. And our answer was, look, we didn't want to cause any trouble. This was not intentional. We'll change our name. No problem. We respect your company and your guys' IP. And then 2 weeks later, they changed their name. And I was like, well, why did we do this? Why did you make me go through this process?
Oh my gosh, so how did you land on the name that you do have today?
Well, partially it was because we knew it was a name no one would ever have. bioSyntagma, it's very original. But also we have one of our co-founders is from Russia, and as we were talking, Syntagma Square is a famous square in Greece. So we all said, well, that sounds great. He's been there, he likes it. We'll throw a bio in front of it, and yeah. So it's not really an exotic story, but it's a safe one.
I love that. I mean, it goes right along the bio and the favorite place that you've been. It reminds me of all the founders that are like, what's the cutest animal and what's your favorite color? And that's what we're
right.
Well, I mean, that's good. I mean, it's, sometimes it's not these crazy elaborate origin stories where it's like I was sitting in a park and a newspaper flew by and this name just,
Yeah.
Well, I do like it. I think it's a little catchy there. It's clever, and that's a fun story because traveling internationally is fun. So I mean, you guys are building this product. You guys are building this. You have to have kind of a team dynamic, even though it's just a couple of you. What is your team's culture like?
Oh man, our our team may not look very different from each other, but we really are diverse, especially in thought and mindsets. So in terms of, we've got an MD, PhD, who's practice doctor and also as a molecular biologist. Another person who has a lab and biology background. I have an engineering background, and another guy with a different type of engineering. But really together, there's a hierarchy like there is in every business, but we try to operate more like a democracy. My take is that unity is really important, especially if you're doing something hard. You all need to be both motivated and just unified, because it's hard enough to have a startup as it is, let alone having division within your team. And it's really easy, as you're doing just the hard things in and out day by day, for somebody to get discouraged, and you need the team to both pick you up and to provide new ideas. And so we've worked closely now for several years, and I'm very protective of them. I feel more like friends than co-founders, but yeah.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you guys are friends and have managed to set up a democracy, draw straws perhaps to do the administrative paperwork, and you're all good there.
Well, as long as everyone kind of naturally has different preferences. So I hate doing admin work and doesn't mind it. And it's like, that's a really great natural division of labor.
Well, good. And we touched on it briefly about how COVID kind of impacted your business. And you had mentioned that you switched and, pivoted temporarily to do the testing sites. Let's talk about that period in your business.
Sure. Oh, what an interesting period that was. Oh man. So we worked, So I was fundraising actually for bioSyntagma, and then we had some people come together, and it looked like we were going to put together a Series A, and it was exciting. And then shortly, maybe a week after that, things locked down, and everyone kind of went into their caves, including investors, and so that round fell apart, and we were kind of left with, wow, we didn't plan for this, and our financing just disappeared. Mm-hmm. I had to do something. And it was really fortuitous. Somebody I had met in the past reached out and said, testing is going to be big. Can you guys help us make tests? And we said, yeah, we're good at that. So over the next few months, we actually made about 183 different types of COVID tests.
Wow.
And the reason for that was there was so much supply chain issues early on in COVID, where there wasn't enough of chemicals, so there wasn't enough plastic pieces, or there wasn't this or that, or, China stopped shipping, and all these issues. And so we basically developed, 183 versions of the test based on the supplies we could find. Just so that when people would send us tests, we could run at least one of those 183 to test them for COVID, depending on what was in stock. And so we ended up licensing the recipes for those tests to different labs and helped some labs start up in different states. And since the beginning of the pandemic, somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 of our tests have been used in the Southwest region. So we're really proud to have kind of helped participate in that.
Wow. I can't even imagine. I mean, the fact that you guys are very intelligent. I don't know any other way to put it. The fact that you guys were able to say, okay, well, let's pause for a minute. Let's just go over and fix this. We'll just develop 183 and, different versions.
Yeah. What's something you're really good at?
I'm jack of all trades, master of none. I mean, I guess operations. That's what I do.
I don't know if you were really good at, I don't know, painting, for example. Like, we just happen to be really good at something, and it's just kind of coincidental that the whole world suddenly needed that skill. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if we were really that smart, or if, we do PCR, and we're really good at it. We can make custom stuff, and it's just part of our workflow. And suddenly the world valued that skill. And usually people are like, what's PCR? What do you do? And now like everybody knows what that is, and because they're ordering PCR COVID tests. So it's kind of just weird that, like, oh wow, suddenly what we do is valuable.
Well, I mean, if anyone needs a stuffed pepper recipe, that will be my time to shine.
You never know what the world's going to need.
You never know. It could be. It's the baking the pepper before you put in the meat that kills it. So anyway, I just think it's really cool that you guys were able to step in at a time when you could have potentially paused. You could have said, we're just going to focus on what we do and what we're currently working on, but instead you were able to shift and really leverage, not leverage a problem, but see a problem and really be able to step in and be a solution to that.
Well, it was fortunate that we could be a part of the solution, but it was also partially survival, because who knew how long we were going to be locked down, and suddenly people weren't doing anything. So people weren't doing R&D. People, the financiers that we were trying to raise money with were gone. Mm-hmm. Kind of sitting there looking at each other like, what do we do? What next? So it was, we're very, in an unfortunate time, we were really fortunate to be able to participate in helping out with the pandemic.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that your company has a lot of things going, and there's just so much information that comes with it. And I'd love to give our listeners some direction on how they can learn more about what you do and what you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, so how to learn more, we have a website. It's kind of cryptic in what we do. But I really enjoy talking to people. My email is just david@biosyntagma.com. By all means, reach out. It might take me a little time to get back to you, but I'd love to do it. we're a lot of what we do is technical, and so it can be difficult to kind of explain. Oh, we had an exciting day in the R&D world, because what does that mean? But in terms of the outcomes, I love to talk to people. Our team is very people oriented, because that's why we do it. So reach out from our website, email me. Happy to chat.
Well, good. Well, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how things progress. And you made a really good point. It may take, many, many years for a medical treatment or a vaccine or those things to come out. But what you guys are doing could happen quickly. Like, it could progress very quickly. And I think that that's a really exciting differentiator and such a cool opportunity for what you guys do. So thank you so much for chatting with me. And I will be watching your guys' company very closely.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your time.